Welcome to Advanced Astrology, working with transits. Yay! In this 4-week series, we are going to go in depth and explore this forecasting technique that you can use to look at ahead and look and see what kinds of events and circumstances might be on the horizon. And also you can use transits to look behind and make sense and gain meaning from particularly challenging or exciting times in your life. Transits are one of a number of predictive tools that we astrologers have in our toolbox. And there will be advanced classes in the future covering some of those others, like working with progressions or working with solar returns. But for now, we're just going to focus on transits. In this first class, we will talk about why we do predictive work, some of the predictive tools that are available for you, and then what is a transit? And finally, we'll give an overview of how to work with transits. So why do we do predictive astrology? Well, there's a real sense of satisfaction that I get as an astrologer when I'm working with a client and after our session, a week, a month, maybe even 6 months later, they'll send a message to me and say, "Oh my gosh, you said this was going to happen, and it did." And there's a real deep sense of satisfaction that comes from being able to help someone navigate their lives. And especially during challenging times, like during a divorce or during a move or during the loss of a loved one. Predictive astrology gives a language of symbols that helps you understand why this is happening, so that then you can make conscious decisions and use your free will to change your attitude, shift your beliefs, to grow, to evolve, and to really bring meaning into that experience. So predictive astrology helps us see ourselves as part of an unfolding and changing and an evolving universe. And we ourselves are evolving, changing, growing organisms within that universe. And we're connected to the cosmos, and we're connected to one another and to all of created reality. So when you're working with predictive techniques, no matter which one you choose, and in your astrology journey, you might discover that you love working with progressions or solar arcs or solar returns. In addition to transits, I personally have a lot of tools in my toolbox that I incorporate into a session. But as you're working with your tools and as you're developing your predictive abilities, you'll find that the planets tell stories. And they tell stories that help give you context for your life. So why is context so important? Well, it's important because we are mythologically wired. From the time of first recorded history, people were painting stories on walls. We were finding ways to relate to the planets and to our earth and to the stars through the stories of gods and goddesses. And so we have that encoded within us. And following the narratives that the stars provide us, we can see why things are happening and find spiritual significance and psychological significance for the events that are happening and playing out in our lives, or for future events. So it allows us to kind of get a foreshadowing of what storylines might come. And like any good book, foreshadowing lays out some clues for you so that when the events actually come, then you're not surprised. When you're using predictive techniques, cycles and seasons repeat themselves. And with each repetition, we have a whole nother level of understanding and growth. And so you can make conscious choices once you understand how to read those cycles and seasons. And those conscious choices, that's the domain of free will. Another reason we do predictive work is to be prepared. Like you wouldn't go on a vacation to a place with changing weather without looking at the forecast. So that if you need to bring warm clothes, you can bring warm clothes, or if you need an umbrella, you can bring that. So predictive astrology is like that. And And when you're making choices and planning your life, it helps to have an awareness or a sense of what's coming up. So it's kind of like a weather forecast for your life. When you're starting out in your predictive work, the most common chart advancement and predictive techniques that you're going to use are the secondary progressions, solar arc directions, planetary returns, and transits, which this class is all about. What's great is that when you expand your astrology repertoire and you access all of these different tools, you can use them together in conjunction with one another. And it really deepens the accuracy of your predictive work. You can also use them by themselves as standalone techniques. For example, if you only work with transits, you still have enough of a framework to be able to do some really good predictive work. I want to give you an overview of the other predictive techniques before we really get into transits. And so let's start with secondary progressions. A natal chart is a picture of what was happening in the heavens at a specific day, time, and from the vantage point of a specific place. For an individual, the natal chart maps out the soul's intention, and it shows our tendencies, our proclivities, our challenges, karma, and you pretty much get a whole picture of what the soul came here to do. The soul evolves and grows and changes, and secondary progressions map out for us those changes. With a secondary progression, you advance the chart one day for every year of life. So if you're born on November 12th, 1968, and you are wanting to look back and see what was happening in your secondary progressions on your 8th birthday, and see a little bit about that year, maybe it was a really significant year in your life. If you're looking at an ephemeris and drawing out a chart by hand, you would look at the date of November 20th, 1968, and you would draw up a chart for that date. That chart would show the secondary progressions for your 8th year. When you're working with a secondary progression, you can read the chart on its own and understand a little bit more about the cycle of that particular time in your life. You can also relate it to the natal chart. And what you would do is you would draw correlations between the progressed planets that are advancing forward and the natal planets. And when there's a relationship by aspect between one of the progressed planets and a natal planet, or between two progressed planets, that's just moving into gear. So we're talking about the faster moving planets here, the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars. When there's an aspect relationship between any one of those, progressed or natal, then it's a strong indication that something in that person's life is going to shift. There's going to be a change. Or when one of those progressed heavenly bodies changes signs, or moves into a different house of the chart, it's a sign of a spiritual and psychological shift that's happening within you that precipitates some kind of change that manifests in your life. And it's a turning point that's necessary for some kind of evolutionary process. And when there is a shift or a change that's happening in your progressed chart, or an aspect relationship between your progressed chart and your natal chart, that influence can be with you for 6 months, a year, or even more. Now, you might be wondering, what is the significance of one day symbolizing an entire year? It's based on the understanding of as above, so below, which is in the Hermetic texts. And we covered it a little bit in Astrology 101 as well. And so there's this idea that one day in the life of the cosmos is equivalent to 1 year in the life of the earth, or one day in the life of God is equivalent to 1 year in the life of the human. So it's another way for us to understand our connection to the cosmos and the divine. Solar arc directions is another technique that you will come across in your studies, and you might even explore or experiment with yourself. It is similar to secondary progressions, except for one really big difference, and that is that all the significant chart points advance forward at the same rate the sun moves in one day, unless they're retrograde, and in that case, they're advancing backwards at that same rate. Now, we know that the sun moves about 1 degree a day, and so we look for the sun's motion, and we base everything else on that time. Solar arc directions trigger events in life, or they can activate different aspects in a natal chart or different planets in a natal chart. And during a solar arc year, or a time in which the solar arc directions are activating those points in the natal chart are going to get a lot of attention, and you might experience more activity in those areas of your life. With this technique, a shift of a planet into a new sign or a house marks a really significant turning point in life, a new beginning of sorts. Next, we move on to the planetary return. And a return chart is a chart that's erected for the moment a planet or luminary returns to the same place it was at the time of your birth. The same degree, the same sign, everything. And that sets into gear a whole new cycle specific to that heavenly body. The most common one is the solar return, and this happens every year right around the time of your birthday. And it's when the sun returns back to the same place it was at the time of your birth. And a solar return cycle indicates an overview of what the year is going to be like. And you read the chart just like you would read a natal chart, very independently. And you'd focus on some of the big themes. With transits, progressions, and directions, you're looking at the heavenly bodies in motion and relating them back to the natal chart. And the natal chart is always the baseline. With returns, on the other hand, you're reading those charts independently and looking at what does the chart symbolize about this particular year or this particular cycle. Because the planets move at different speeds, each planetary return will be a chart for a time that's specific to that particular planet. So, for example, a solar return is going to be a yearly cycle. A Mars return is going to be a 2.5-year cycle, and so on. And I encourage you to explore those as you deepen your astrology knowledge. Now that you have an overview of some other forecasting techniques, let's get into transits. Talk about those. So what is a transit? A natal chart shows a snapshot of the heavens for a specific date, time, and place. Transiting planets are planets that are in motion. When a transiting planet forms an aspect to any point in the natal chart, it can trigger a life event. It also activates potential that's indicated in that natal chart. Now, the point in the natal chart could be a house cusp. It could be the sun, the moon, a planet, the north node, south node, asteroids, part of fortune. It could be any sensitive point. Transits can trigger events in your life. Now, those events can be external events, like a new job, for example, or a relationship or a move. But we can also look at events as from a psychological or spiritual perspective. Sometimes if you have a transit that indicates a really significant event, that can be a shift within you. Maybe it's a conversation that you have that opens your mind to something, or it could even be a realization or an aha moment. Well, those are as significant as the external events that are manifesting in our lives, because often those aha moments, those awakenings, those spiritual shifts precede a series of events that plays out that culminates in an external event, like leaving a relationship. So you could have a strong Uranus-Venus transit, for example. And we know Uranus is about freedom and liberation, and Venus is relationships. And at the moment where it's exact, that transit's exact, You could have you could make a decision about leaving a relationship, for example. Well, it's going to take some time for that decision to play out, and you're going to probably question it every step of the way. There's a defining moment when you're making that decision. So that can be triggered by transits as well. You can look at transits to identify themes in your life. So, for example, looking ahead on a forecast, you can see what transits are coming up, and you can get a gauge of what priorities or what might be in focus for you at that time. And so they can indicate general themes. Likewise, you can look back at your life, and if there was a time that was particularly challenging, you could look at the transits and get additional meaning about that time in your life, or about why those challenges might have occurred. But it's important to note that transits can only bring or only trigger life circumstances and events that are possible in the natal chart. So the example I like to use is a lottery win. If you have Jupiter in the 5th house of speculation and gambling, and it's nicely aspected, and maybe it's in Sagittarius, its own sign, so you got a great Jupiter in the 5th house. Well, if you have a really strong Jupiter transit, or if there's an outer planet that's making a transit to Jupiter in a favorable way, then you might win the lottery. So that's already indicated in your birth chart as a potential. However, if you've got Saturn in the 5th house, and maybe it's in Cancer, and it's poorly aspected, then it's not likely that you're going to win the lottery. So the best Jupiter transits and the best lottery winning transits that you could have might trigger some exciting things in your life, but they might not manifest as a lottery win, for example. So we always, when working with transits, refer back to the natal chart. That shows us our baseline. It's where we start from. And transits trigger those natal influences. So they really help to bring alive the potentiality that's present in your birth chart. Transits also show deeper meaning for life circumstances. So when you're going through any life circumstance, you can always look and see what transits are happening to understand the significance and the symbolism of those planets involved and the signs and the houses. And it helps to give you a storyline to make sense of what's happening in your life. Planets can also transit houses in a natal chart, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next class. When a planet moves through a house, each planet moves at a different speed, and so the sun, for example, stays in a house one month at a time, moving 12 months around the zodiac. The moon stays in a house for about 2.5 days. And so if you really want to start tracking those faster moving planets, Mercury, Venus, the sun, you can get a sense of what happens when transits move through a specific area of your chart. Often you'll find that, especially with the sun and the moon, that area of your life is highlighted, and usually you'll see events or circumstances that are playing out in that area of your life. This is what it looks like when you see transits on a bi-wheel chart. So the natal chart is on the inside and the transiting planets are on the outside. And I just erected a sample chart for this one just to show you an example. And I did it specifically, the sun, I wanted the sun to be pretty close to where it was right around the time of that birth. So it's on the same day. This would be a birthday. So the natal chart being January 3rd, 1999, the transiting chart being January 3rd, 2019. What you'll find here is that the transiting Sun, transiting Saturn, and Pluto are all in the 5th house. And transiting Venus is right there next to the IC. And Jupiter, the Moon, and Mercury are all transiting through the 4th house. And Mars is transiting through the 8th house, Uranus through the 9th, and Neptune through the 7th. So already, knowing your astrological language, you can probably come up with a few keywords just off the bat, just thinking about the houses and where those planets are in relation to the natal planets. And so a bi-wheel configuration helps you to put those two charts together and see it really clearly. I created this chart in SolarFire, which is a program, it's a PC-based program, but I use it on Mac through Virtual Machine. And it is my favorite program. The only drawback is that it's only available in PC. This is one of a number of programs that are available for you to run your transit charts, to see what transits are coming ahead. And throughout this course, we'll be talking about different options for you and different ways to look at transits. And this bi-wheel is another example I wanted to show you from Time Passages, which is another program I use. And it's actually, if you're a Mac user, Time Passages is one of the better Mac programs. And this format is really easy to work with when you're starting to work with transits, because it actually shows lines going from the outer wheel or the transiting wheel, the transiting chart, to the natal influences. So you can see here, I just pulled up Serena Williams' chart. And on this particular day, December 14th, you see that transiting Sun was conjunct her Neptune. And there's a green line that shows a sextile from her Sun to Pluto. So and then, she's got some oppositions there. She's got Mars. You'll see right there on the left side of the screen in the 12th house. She's got Mars, transiting Mars, opposing her natal Jupiter, and transiting Moon, opposed her natal Jupiter. So it's just a really easy way to get a quick snapshot of what the transits are doing. There are several different ways to access transits and to find what transits are happening. Certainly, if you have access to software, that is perhaps one of the easiest ways to access transits. You can also look in an astrological calendar and see upcoming transits. But I really encourage you all to invest in a good ephemeris. An ephemeris is a book that lists the position of planets, the sun and the moon, asteroids, for every day of every year from, this one specifically is from 1950 to 2050. So you can look at any day between 1950 and 2050 and see what was happening in the heavens. Let's go over a few guidelines that you'll find helpful when you're working with transits. First of all, the slower the transiting planet and the faster the natal planet, the more you will feel the transit and the more significantly it will influence your life. So remember from Astrology 101, the outer planets move more slowly than the personal planets. And Pluto is the slowest, the moon being the fastest. So just to refresh your memory, let's look at fast versus slow-moving planets. We start with the sun. It takes 365 days for the sun to make one full rotation around the zodiac. For the moon, it's 28 days. Mercury, 88 days. Venus, a little bit less than a year. And Mars, 2.5 years. Each one of these planets and the luminaries symbolize your aspects of your personal life. Venus being your relationships, your sense of personal style, your aesthetic tastes and sensibilities, and also your finances. The moon being your emotions and your home and your family. Mars being your physical vitality, your sex drive, your libido, being your sense of competition, your drive, your ambition. Mercury being how you think, your communication. And the sun being your vitality, your creativity, your sense of self, confidence, and even your health. These next planets move more slowly around the zodiac. It takes Jupiter 12 years to make one full rotation. It takes the nodes 18.6 years. Saturn, it takes 28.5 years. Uranus takes 84 years. Neptune, 165 years. and Pluto 250 years. When you're working with transits, conjunctions and oppositions are the most powerful transits. Conjunctions being 0 degrees, so it looks like the transiting planet is almost exactly at the same degree as the natal planet. Oppositions are 180 degrees. So the transiting planet is opposite 180 degrees away from the natal planet. Trines, squares, sextiles, and quincunx are next in terms of the potency of the transits. Trines are 120 degrees, squares 90 degrees, sextiles 60 degrees, and quincunx 150 degrees. Minor aspect transits are important, but their influences are often felt as internal shifts unless they trigger slower transits or progressions. Let's take each aspect one by one, and we'll start with the conjunction at 0 degrees. When you have a transiting conjunction, the transiting planet, it's almost like it comes in and takes over. And so it tends to have authority and power over that natal influence. The natal point in the chart undergoes a change as a result, and there's a transformational process. It could even mean an opportunity. Oppositions at 180 degrees apart represent a polarity, and usually with a transiting opposition, this plays out in an external event. So it feels like something is happening to you. It can be a conflict with another person. It could even be a projection of your own stuff onto someone else that then creates a sense of conflict or a sense of strife. It's important to be really self-reflective when you're going through an opposition transit and ask why certain events are happening to you, because there's usually something, a growth process or an awareness about yourself that's needing to happen that's playing out in these external events. But when you're going through it, often an opposition can feel like something beyond your control is happening and like things are happening to you. Squares at 90 degrees represent internal tension or frustration, and it's the kind of frustration that compounds and builds until you feel motivated to make some kind of change in your life. They can present themselves as external conflicts or external events that prompt internal change, but the real shift is happening internally versus an opposition which is manifesting externally. Squares push us beyond our comfort zones, but that's where we reach a new growth edge for ourselves. So square transits promote growth, generally, and they also contribute to your soul's evolutionary process. But they aren't always easy. Sometimes they can be really challenging. But there is usually some kind of opportunity or some kind of reward at the end. Trines at 120 degrees, it's kind of like an open circuit between 2 points. And with trine transits, things happen fast. And there's no judgment about what is happening. We just know that the energy is open. So whatever that circumstance is, whether it's easy or challenging, depends on the natal points or the life circumstances that you're encountering. But the trine just opens up that flow. It kind of speeds up the timeline. With sextile transits, the key to making the most of them is to really be clear about what it is that you want, what your intentions are, what you're wanting to manifest in relation to the natal planets that are associated with those transits, so that you can really seize opportunities when they come your way and not miss them or overlook them, or so that you can put some feelers out and take some action steps ahead of time to really prepare. So for example, if you're wanting a new relationship but you don't have any extra time, then create some extra time before that sextile transit comes up. That way, when you meet your person or an opportunity to meet someone arises, you have some flexibility so you can maximize the potential of that transit. Quincunx transits tend to be about change and release, letting go. With these transits, you might experience circumstances that allow you to let go of something or someone so that you can prepare for a new beginning. And so at the time, they can feel like a loss, And sometimes that loss isn't necessarily an external thing. Sometimes you're letting go or releasing a pattern that you have in relationships, or an event from your past, or maybe you're doing some forgiveness work. So sometimes it can be a real internal process, whereas other times it can be an external process. But either way, whatever is being lost is creating space for you. Semi-square at 45 degrees is a minor transit, and these transits indicate frustrations or minor setbacks. This can be a test of faith, or it can be a trial of patience. It can also indicate that it's time to take a step back and reassess. So if you're trying to force something, or you're trying to push a project along, and you notice that you're in the middle of a semi-square transit, then perhaps what you might want to do is to let go, give it some time, and revisit that issue on the other side. Or sometimes it can just indicate that there are delays. Sesquiquadrats at 135 degrees represent frustrations and delays. This transit usually occurs in a situation that will eventually ease up, but the delay serves as a little bit of a test, and it tries your patience. So, and it also gives you an opportunity to reassess and to and maybe to try something new, try a new approach. Septiles at 51.4 degrees and biseptiles at 103 degrees are really interesting transits. They usually signify unusual spiritual or paranormal events. And, some of these include like sudden insights, near-death experiences, UFO sightings, and psychic connections, things of that nature. Quintiles at 72 degrees and biquintiles at 144 degrees signify creativity and romance. When you think of quintiles, think about them in relation to the planet Venus. They have that sort of quality. Semisextiles at 30 degrees are really subtle. And these transits relate to timing, and often they can trigger a longer transit. Sometimes they show an internal shift that opens the mind to a new possibility or an opportunity to receive guidance. So this can also be a timing transit. Now, in talking about the transiting aspects, we used a lot of language like challenging or opportunity, but it's important to reserve judgment, that no transit is good, no transit is bad. Everything that happens astrologically supports our soul's growth and evolution. Each one of those outer planets symbolizes a different evolutionary process. And when you can understand the symbolism, then you can gain conscious awareness about why things are manifesting in your life and what you might be doing to contribute to them. So the symbols, the planets always offer symbolic resonance, symbolic meaning. And that's one of the gifts of astrology. It helps us to understand the whys, why things are happening the way they are. And it also shows us, based on that information and that knowledge, what is the decision that we could make that serves our best and highest good. So there are no bad transits. Even though when you're going through one, you might feel like you're being pushed to the edge, it's still serving a purpose in the greater unfolding story of your life. I wanted to leave you with a quote by Rob Hand, who is a very well-known, recognized astrologer. This is from his book, Planets in Transit, which I highly recommend if you're looking for more information about transits. And he says, transits are signs of the manifestation of original intention, part of which is experienced as a flowing through you as will. This is the intention that you are aware of. Part of the intention is coming from without. You may call it fate, destiny, or circumstances beyond your control, but this too comes from within you, and you need only raise your consciousness to know it. What he's saying here is that during transits, circumstances manifest in your life. Where those manifestations are coming from isn't always consciously known. Sometimes they can be driven by the higher self, or sometimes they can be driven or triggered by the ego, the conscious will. We participate in the creation of our reality and the unfolding of our destiny. The natal chart shows our soul's original intentions. And some of that is consciously known to us, but some of it is unconscious. Some of it we're not aware of. Some of it, I would actually even add to this, that there are some manifestations that are coming from the subconscious. So those fears, those limiting ideas, those beliefs, that structure, the framework for our subconscious minds, those are running the show in addition to the will, the conscious will, and the higher self or the soul. When you're working with transits, you have an opportunity to look at the unfolding story. And in doing so, you can integrate the conscious will, the subconscious mind, and the higher self so that you're playing more of an active role in shaping your own destiny. So I hope that was clear, and I hope it piqued your curiosity just enough so that we can take all of this information to another level next time. In the next 2 classes, we are going to be going planet by planet and looking at the symbolism for each transiting planet. And then in our last class, we're going to be putting it all together, and I'm going to show you a technique for how to interpret transits and work with them. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and I look forward to seeing you in class.